The galaxy banned projectile weapons centuries ago, but today a human walked into my office carrying one and it punched through 3 layers of military armor. My name is Kelver Thrace and I have worked in the Galactic Coalition Security Division for approximately 23 standard cycles. Not the most glamorous position in the universe, I will admit. While other species get to explore nebulae or negotiate trade agreements with exotic civilizations, and GT, music, and GT, I get to sit in a climate-controlled office reviewing weapons complaints, reports, thrilling stuff. Truly, my offspring are so proud. But here is the thing about boring music jobs: they exist because someone somewhere did something monumentally stupid, and now the rest of us have to make sure it never happens again. In my case, that something stupid was the Kandarian massacre of Cycle 24,247. Perhaps you have heard of it. No, well, allow me to educate you, because understanding that particular bloodbath music is essential to understanding why I am currently staring at my data screen with a feeling of impending doom. And GT, music, and GT, the Kandarians, bless their extinct little hearts, had developed projectile weapons technology to an absolutely absurd degree. Music, railguns, coilguns, kinetically propelled slugs that could punch music through starship hulls. They were very, very good at making things that threw other things' music very, very fast. They were significantly less good at conflict resolution, diplomatic negotiation, or basic impulse music control. When a trade dispute with the Vexillian commerce fleet went south, the Kandarians decided that the appropriate response was to open fire music on 14 civilian cargo vessels. The death toll was catastrophic: over 40,000 sentients gone in approximately 9 minutes. Galactic Coalition, which had been happily ignoring music, the Kandarians, up until that point, suddenly had to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, allowing species to run around with weapons capable of relativistic bombardment was not the best idea. Thus, the Treaty of Civilized Music Armament was born. Catchy name, right? Some committee spent 6 months arguing about the title. I was there for those meetings. I will never get those hours back. The treaty was actually quite simple in its premise. Projectile weapons, defined as any device music that propels a solid mass using chemical, magnetic, or kinetic energy with the intent to cause music harm, were banned across all coalition space. Outlawed, prohibited, forbidden music. Any species wanting to maintain coalition membership had to decommission, destroy, or lock away every last firearm, railgun, and mass driver in their arsenal. The alternative was energy-based weaponry, plasma rifles, laser cannons, and GT, music, and GT, particle beams, the whole glowing arsenal of civilized warfare. These weapons, the coalition music argued, were more precise, more controllable, and significantly less likely to accidentally punch holes through space stations if someone missed their target. Energy dissipates. Solid slugs traveling at hypersonic speeds do not. They just keep going until they hit something, and then space, there is always something. Eventually, was the treaty perfect? Absolutely not. Did it have loopholes? Oh, you have no idea. But did it make the galaxy safer? Well, we have not had another Kandarian massacre, so I suppose That counts as a music win. Most species adapted beautifully. The Thrakanari had been using plasma weapons for centuries anyway, so the transition was seamless. The Xyloph music actually thanked us, claiming that the band gave them an excellent excuse to finally retire their aging ballistic stockpiles. Music. Even the stubborn Brexian Empire, who initially protested on principle, eventually came around once they realized music how much money they could save on ammunition logistics. Within 2 cycles, the galaxy had largely moved on. Projectile weapons. Music became museum pieces, historical curiosities, cautionary tales. Music told to young military cadets. We in the security division congratulated ourselves on a music job well done. The galaxy was civilized now. We had evolved beyond such primitive methods of conflict. I personally reviewed hundreds of compliance reports during those cycle, species after species, checking off boxes, confirming decommission. Music. Filing paperwork. It became routine. Dull, the kind of work that makes you question your life. Music choices while you are eating lunch at your desk for the 3rd day in a row. And then, approximately 6 months ago, our long-range survey music teams detected signs of developing civilization in a previously unexplored arm of the galaxy. A species that had just achieved faster-than-light capability. Music stumbling out into the cosmos with all the grace of a newborn Threxian trying to walk. Standard first contact protocols were initiated. Cultural exchange programs were proposed. Integration procedures were scheduled. Music. The species called themselves humans, and they came from a little blue-green planet they had named with absolutely music, no creativity whatsoever. Their initial reports were concerning, not dangerous, mind you, just concerning. They had apparently been through several major conflicts using projectile weapons before developing energy alternatives. Their compliance review was flagged as mandatory, which meant that I, Kelver, Thrace, mid-level bureaucrat extraordinaire, and GT, music, and GT would be personally overseeing their transition to civilized armament standards. I remember thinking that this would be simple, another routine review, another checkmark on another report. Music. I was, and I cannot stress this enough, catastrophically wrong. The humans arrived on Station Sentinel-7 3 weeks after their initial contact package reached my desk. I had read through their preliminary files with what I can only describe as amused condescension. They had barely left their own star system before we found them, still squabbling among themselves over borders and resources like children fighting over toys. Their technology was functional but crude. Their diplomacy was rough around the edges, and their fashion sense was quite music. Frankly baffling. One of their delegates had shown up to a formal greeting ceremony wearing what appeared to be a decorative noose around his music neck. They called it a tie. I called it a cry for help. Still, they seemed eager to comply with coalition music standards, which was refreshing. Some species get defensive when you tell them their entire military doctrine is now music illegal. The humans just shrugged and said they had been expecting it. Apparently they had a saying about bringing knives music to gunfights that I did not quite understand, but they assured me it was relevant. The compliance meeting was Scheduled for hour 13 station time. I arrived early as always with my data pad and a lukewarm cup of something. Music, the station cafeteria claimed, was coffee but tasted more like liquid. Regret, the conference room was standard. Coalition music, issue all smooth. Surfaces and neutral colors designed to offend absolutely music no 112. Representatives from various member species sat around the central table, most of them looking as bored as I felt. The humans were late naturally. When they finally did arrive, music there were 3 of them. The lead delegate was a tall female with dark skin and hair pulled back in a severely practical music style. She introduced herself as Commander Alexis Chen, Human Military Liaison. Behind her came 2 others. A stocky male named Officer Dmitry Music Volkov and a younger woman with bright red hair called Lieutenant Rebecca Kane. They moved with a casual confidence that immediately annoyed several music of the more formal delegates present. Apologies for the delay, Commander Chen said, her accent clipped and efficient. We had to go through customs, apparently bringing weapons to a weapons compliance meeting raises flags. Who knew? She said this with a completely straight face. I could not tell if she was joking. Please sit, I said, gesturing to the open seats. We appreciate your cooperation with this process. The transition to energy-based armament music can seem daunting at first, but I assure you, thousands of species have successfully made the change. You will find that plasma and laser music weaponry are far more effective for modern combat scenarios and significantly safer for all parties involved. Commander Chen smiled. Music. It was not a reassuring smile. Oh, we are not worried about the transition. We have been developing music, energy, weapons for decades, lasers, masers, particle accelerators, the whole package. We are happy to adopt those for standard military operations. This was excellent news. I actually relaxed a bit, leaning back in my chair. Wonderful, then this should be a very brief meeting. We will simply need you to submit your projectile weapon inventories for decommissioning. Music. Sign the treaty compliance forms and we can all move on with our lives, right? Yes, about that, Lieutenant Kane spoke up. She had placed a long curved case on the table, approximately 1.2 m in length. Music. We did want to clarify something about the treaty definitions before we proceed. A Brexian delegate named Music Torkmal, who had been half asleep up until this point, perked up slightly. Clarify, the treaty is quite clear. All projectile weapons are banned. Music, no exceptions. Exactly, Officer Volkov said, his voice carrying a thick accent. I later Music learned was Russian. Projectile weapons defined as devices using chemical, magnetic, or kinetic energy. Music to propel solid mass. Yes, I nodded slowly. That is correct, and this ban applies to firearms. Specifically, Commander Chen continued. Music. Guns, railguns, coil guns, anything that uses gunpowder, electromagnetic acceleration, or similar propulsion methods. And GT. Music. And GT. Yes, I said, starting to feel uneasy. Where exactly are you going with this? Commander Chen. Music opened the case. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was one of the strangest objects I had ever seen. It appeared to be 2 curved pieces of some lightweight material, connected by a central music grip and what looked like flexible cord or wire. The entire thing was maybe a meter long, elegant in its simplicity and completely music, unfamiliar too. Everyone in the room, this, she said, lifting it out carefully, is a compound bow. It is a recreational device used by millions of humans for sport and hunting. It propels arrows using elastic energy stored in these limbs here when you pull back the string. No chemicals, no magnetism, no electronics, just tension and release. The room was silent. Several delegates leaned forward to examine the device more closely. Torkmel actually laughed, a deep, rumbling music sound that shook his jowls. This is a weapon, he asked incredulously. This bent stick with string, technically it is sporting equipment, Lieutenant Kane said sweetly. And GT, music. And GT, but yes, it can be used to propel a pointed shaft at high velocity toward a target. We thought we should disclose it. Music, given the, whole compliance thing. I stared at the bow. It looked like something a primitive species might make after discovering basic tool use. The materials appeared to be carbon fiber and aluminum. Relatively modern, but the concept was ancient, laughably ancient. And this propels projectiles how fast? And GT, music. And GT, exactly, I asked, already preparing to check the box marked irrelevant. Primitive technology on my data pad. Oh, anywhere from 200 to 350 music FT per second, Commander Chen said, casually, depending on the draw weight. And arrow weight, of course. Music. This particular model can deliver about 70 lb of kinetic energy at full draw. I did some quick mental calculations. That was what, roughly 100 m per second. That would music barely scratch modern armor plating. The Kandarian weapons had been hypersonic. This was at best a slightly dangerous toy. I see, I said, trying very hard not to sound condescending. Music and failing completely. And you are concerned this recreational bow might violate the treaty. And GT, music. And GT, we just wanted to be thorough, officer, Volkov said with a shrug. Better to ask than assume. Yes, Torkmel was still music, chuckling. Even the normally stoic Zelef delegate seemed amused, her antenna music twitching in what I recognized as suppressed laughter. No, I said firmly. The treaty specifically addresses firearms and advanced projectile music systems. Your sporting equipment is not covered under any of the prohibited categories. Music. You are free to keep your bows and arrows. Commander Chen smiled again. That same unsettling smile. Music. Excellent. We were hoping you would say that. In that case, would you mind if we provided a small demonstration? Music. Just so everyone understands what we are talking about. We have some test material set up in Cargo Bay 5. Every instinct I possess told me to say no, to end the meeting right there, file the paperwork, and go back to my boring safe desk job. But regulations required that we thoroughly document any potential gray areas in treaty compliance, and technically this qualified. Very well, I heard myself say. And GT, music. And GT, a brief demonstration should be acceptable. I really should have trusted my instincts. Cargo Bay 5 was one of the larger testing facilities on Station Sentinel-7, typically used for evaluating new shield generators or testing energy weapon prototypes. It had reinforced walls, proper ventilation, and enough space to safely discharge most standard armaments without causing a station-wide music emergency. The humans had apparently requisitioned it earlier in the day, which should have been my second warning. Signed, the first was that smile. By the time we arrived, they had already music set up their testing area. At the far end of the bay, approximately 50 m music from the firing line, stood a series of vertical frames holding what I recognized immediately as standard Coalition combat armor plating, 3 panels to be precise, each one separated music by about 10 cm of empty space. The material was a titanium ceramic composite used by at least 40% of Coalition music military forces. It could withstand direct hits from most small arms, plasma fire, and shrug off laser strikes that would music melt through starship hulls. Is this your target? I asked, gesturing at the setup. If that is okay music with you, Lieutenant Kane replied. She was busy assembling something at the firing line, another one of those bow devices, though this one looked significantly more robust than music. The first. We brought our own materials, but Officer Volkov figured you might want us to test against actual military-grade equipment. You know, for accuracy. Torquemol music had stopped laughing. He was staring at the armor plates with his 4 eyes narrowed. You cannot be serious. You think that toy will even scratch those panels? Commander Chen, who had been double-checking something music on her data pad, looked up. Honestly, we are not sure. We have never tested against your specific alloy composition, but our penetration tests on Earth music suggested should be interesting. At minimum should be interesting. Those 3 words should have made me cancel the entire demonstration right then and there. Nothing good ever follows. Should be interesting in a military context. Officer Volkov stepped up to the firing music line holding the bow. He was a large human by their standards, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, and he handled the weapon with the casual ease of long practice. The bow itself was matte black, covered in strange protrusions and mechanical assists that I later learned were called cams, stabilizers and sights. Attached to the side was a narrow tube holding several slim projectiles, their tips gleaming metallically under the bay's lighting. This is a hunting bow, he announced to the assembled group, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. I use this to hunt elk in Siberian wilderness. Elk are large animals, very tough, thick hide and heavy bones. And GT music. And GT. This bow is designed to punch through that and reach vital organs. Draw weight is 80 lb. Arrow is carbon fiber shaft with music, broadhead tip, 125 grains. Fixed blade design. None of those specifications meant anything to anyone present. Pounds, grains, music. We used metric measurements like civilized beings, but the way he said it with that matter-of-fact confidence made something in my primary stomach clench uncomfortably. Whenever you are ready, I said, trying music to sound authoritative and professional. Please proceed. Volkov nodded. He drew the bow back in one smooth music motion, and I heard several sharp gasps from the other delegates. The bow bent into a shape that looked physically impossible. The string pulled music back to his face, his stance solid and unwavering. For approximately 3 seconds, everything was Perfectly still, the bay was silent, except for the ambient hum of music. Station life support systems, then he released. I'm not sure what I expected. A soft twang perhaps, a gentle whisper. Music as the arrow flew through the air, something appropriately pathetic for such a primitive weapon. And GT, music. And GT. What I got was a sharp cracking snap that echoed through the entire cargo bay. Like a miniature explosion, the arrow moved so fast I could not actually see it, just a blur of motion followed immediately by an unholy clang of metal on metal that made everyone jump. For a moment nothing happened. We all stared at the armor plates, waiting to see the arrow music bounce harmlessly off the surface and clatter to the floor. It did not bounce off, it had gone through the first plate entirely. I could see the hole, perfectly round, about 8 min diameter, but that was not the terrifying music part. The terrifying part was that I could see through that hole to a second hole in the second plate music, and if I squinted, a third hole in the third plate. The arrow had penetrated all 3 layers music of military-grade armor and was currently embedded in the reinforced wall behind them. Nobody spoke, we just stood there staring at the impossible holes in the impossible plates while our brains tried to process what we had just witnessed. Torkmel broke the silence. First, that is not possible, he said flatly. Those plates can withstand point-blank plasma fire. There is no way. And GT, music. And GT, a bent stick with string just punched through 3 of them. Commander Chen walked calmly to the target frames. She examined the holes with professional detachment, running her finger along the edges of the entry wound on the first plate. Clean penetration, minimal deformation. The broadhead music did exactly what it was designed to do. How much force? I heard myself ask. My voice sounded strange, music distant, like it was coming from someone else entirely. How much kinetic energy did that arrow carry? Lieutenant Kane consulted her data pad. At impact, approximately 90 J. And GT, music. And GT, give or take. Though the real trick is not the energy, it is the pressure distribution. The broadhead concentrates all that force onto 3 razor-sharp blades with a total cutting surface of about 2 cm. It is not about hitting hard, it is about cutting efficiently. 90 music J. That was less than most handheld energy weapons, significantly less, but those weapons spread their energy across the entire impact area, dissipating heat and force. This arrow, this music, primitive projectile, focused everything into a tiny point and simply shoved its way through music. Your shields, Officer Volkov said conversationally, as if he had not just invalidated approximately 300 music cycles of military doctrine. Your energy shields, they stopped this. Yes. I turned music to look at Torkmel, who was the senior military advisor present. He had gone a disturbing shade of pale green. Music. No, Torkmel said quietly. Our shields are designed to absorb or deflect energy. Weapons, they use magnetic fields and plasma containment to disperse music. Heat and radiation, they do not. They cannot stop solid matter moving at those velocities. Music, the projectile, would pass right through as if the shield was not even there. The implications hit me like a physical music blow. Every major military force in the galaxy relied on energy shields as their primary music defense, ships, vehicles, personal armor, all of it was designed around the assumption that incoming threats would be energy-based. Music, we had built an entire defensive paradigm on that single assumption, and these humans had just demonstrated music that their recreational sporting equipment could ignore all of it completely. Just to be clear, Commander Chen said, her voice cutting through my existential crisis like a knife, this is not military equipment. This is what human civilians use for fun. On weekends, our actual combat bows are significantly more powerful. We have crossbows that can punch through engine blocks. We have compound systems that can shoot accurately at 200 m, and that is not even getting into the specialty ammunition, explosive tips, armor-piercing cores, incendiary designs. She paused, letting that sink. Music in. We just wanted to make sure we were in compliance with your treaty. She continued, since these are not firearms and they do not use chemical, magnetic, or kinetic propulsion as defined in your documentation, we assumed they were acceptable, but if you would like us to decommission them, we are happy to comply. It would affect approximately 40 million human archers. But we understand the importance of galactic security. 40 million they had. 40 million citizens trained in the use of weapons that could defeat our best armor and music, ignore our most advanced shields. I looked at the holes in those armor plates again. 3 perfect circles, all in a neat line. No, I said weakly. No, you are in compliance. And GT, music. And GT, the treaty does not address this type of technology. Excellent, Commander Chen said brightly. In that music case, we head back to finalize the paperwork. I believe you mentioned something about signing compliance music forms. As we filed out of the cargo bay, I cast one last look at those 3 violated armor plates. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice was screaming that we had made a terrible music mistake, that we had just welcomed a species into the coalition who could wage war with equipment we had not even thought to regulate, who could kill with tools so primitive we had dismissed them as irrelevant. But it was too late now. The humans' music were compliant, technically, legally, completely compliant. And that terrified me more than any weapon I had ever seen. The emergency session of the Coalition Security Council convened music approximately 4 hours after the demonstration. I had never seen so many high-ranking officials summoned on such short notice: admirals, music, legal advisors, military strategists, and representatives from every major member species. Music crammed into the council chamber with expressions ranging from confusion to outright panic. The Zealoth ambassador actually teleported directly into her seat, which was against protocol but apparently excusable during a potential music existential crisis. I stood at the central podium, feeling distinctly like I had just accidentally started an intergalactic incident while trying to file routine paperwork. Behind me, a holographic display showed the footage of Officer Volkov's shot on endless repeat. 3 armor plates, 1 arrow, multiple career-ending mistakes. Explain to me. Again, High Counselor Vran, he said, slowly, his Thrakenari tusks grinding together in agitation. How a species we just welcomed into the coalition happens to possess weapons technology that renders our entire defensive Infrastructure obsolete, and we did not notice this during first contact. Screening. And GT, music. And GT, because they are not technically weapons, I said, my voice barely a whisper, according to treaty definitions. They are sporting equipment. The room erupted into overlapping arguments in at least 6 different languages. I caught phrases like catastrophic oversight and complete strategic failure, and who approved this? Idiot for security division, which? Frankly fair senior legal advisor. Mexith, a Vrexian with more law degrees. Music than I had appendages activated. Her microphone with an angry stab. The Treaty of Civilized Armament, Article. Music 3, Section 2 explicitly defines prohibited projectile weapons as any device utilizing chemical music, propellants, electromagnetic acceleration, or compressed gas systems to launch solid ammunition. Bows use elastic tension. Music. They are not covered, then we amend the treaty. Admiral Keflin snapped. His Zeloth antenna were vibrating with barely controlled music fury. Retroactively, immediately. We cannot amend music, a treaty that 47 species have already ratified without unanimous consent. Mexith interrupted music, which would require months of negotiation and approval from every member government, and even if we did, we would be explicitly targeting human technology after granting them membership. The political implications would be disastrous. Commander Chen, who had been invited to attend as a courtesy, cleared her throat politely. Music. All eyes turned to her. She looked remarkably calm for someone who had just appended galactic military doctrine. Before lunch, if I may, she said. Standing, I think there may be some confusion about the scope of what music we are discussing. Bows and arrows are not some secret human superweapon. And GT, music. And GT, they are ancient technology, thousands of years old. We used them long before we developed music firearms. Many humans practice archery purely as a sport, a hobby. Their music are competitions, recreational leagues, youth programs. Music. Torquemol repeated faintly. You train your children in this? Well, yes, it teaches discipline, focus, hand-eye coordination. It is quite popular. She brought up her own data pad, projecting images into the shared holographic space. Here are some other examples of human non-firearm projectile music technology that we assumed were not covered under the treaty regulations. The first image showed a device that looked like a bow mounted horizontally on a stock with a trigger mechanism. This is a crossbow. And GT, music. And GT, it uses the same elastic tension principle, but with a mechanical release, slower to reload than a bow, but requires less training to use. Effectively, draw weights can exceed 200 lb, effective range up to 100 m with modern materials. And GT, music. And GT, the military representatives were frantically taking notes. Several were already running calculations on their personal devices. Music. This, Chen continued, showing another image, is a ballistic knife. The blade detaches and can be propelled up to 5 m. Music, using a compressed spring mechanism, mostly illegal on Earth due to safety concerns. But the technology exists. Spring mechanism, I muttered, not compressed Music gas. Still compliant, and this is a slingshot, she said, showing what looked like a Y-shaped frame with elastic bands, simple, efficient, and capable of propelling projectiles at over 90 ms. Music. There are competitive slingshot sports with participants worldwide. Holographic display music now showed dozens of different devices, atlatls, which were apparently spear throwing, levers music that increased throwing distance, blowguns using lung power to propel darts, something called a trebuchet, which was a massive medieval siege engine that could hurl music 100 kg, projectiles hundreds of meters, using nothing but a counterweight and gravity. You built machines that throw rocks using gravity, Admiral Keflin asked, his voice strangled. Well, yes, but those were mostly obsolete by the 15th century. We just mentioned them for historical completeness, High Counselor. Music, Vran had his head in his hands. Are there any other primitive human technologies we should know about? Commander Chen thought for a moment. Boomerangs come back when you throw them, which is interesting. And GT, music. And GT, throwing axes are popular in recreational competitions. Some enthusiasts practice with chakrams, which are bladed throwing rings. Oh, music, and there is the entire field of historical European martial arts that focuses on medieval combat techniques with swords, polearms, and please stop talking, Vran said weakly. The Military Analysis Division presented their findings next, and if the previous discussion had been concerning, this was catastrophic. According to their simulations, a human infantry unit equipped with modern compound bows could inflict severe casualties on any coalition ground force. Energy shields, which every music species relied on as primary defense, were completely ineffective. The arrows would pass through as if the shields were not even active. Personal armor was somewhat effective, but not enough. The same titanium ceramic composite that had failed so spectacularly in the cargo bay was standard issue across coalition military forces. Heavier armor could potentially music stop the arrows, but that meant choosing between mobility and protection, a trade-off most modern forces had not needed to consider in centuries. What about return fire? Someone asked. Surely our plasma rifles would neutralize them before they could lose more than a few shots. Analyst, a nervous Thrakenari named Kexville, shook his head. Human archers can sustain a rate music of fire between 8 to 12 arrows per minute. With traditional bows, compound bows, music with modern releases can achieve faster rates, and they are accurate beyond 100 m. Our plasma rifles have shorter effective ranges due to beam dispersion, and our soldiers are not trained music for combat against opponents without energy signatures. Energy signatures, I repeated. Music, the final piece clicking into place. Their arrows do not generate heat, radiation, or electromagnetic music fields. Our targeting systems would not even see them coming. Correct, Kexville. Music confirmed, and the arrows themselves are too small and fast for most point defense systems to track effectively. We designed our defenses to intercept missiles, music, and energy blasts, not individual projectiles the size of a finger traveling at subsonic speeds. Music. The room fell into a heavy silence. Centuries of military advancement, countless resources poured into energy weapons and music, shield, technology, entire strategic doctrines, built on assumptions about how modern warfare music worked, all of it undermined by bent sticks and string. So what do? Vran Music looked at Commander Chen, who had been sitting quietly through the entire analysis, that same slight smile on her music face. I suppose, Vran said tiredly, we do nothing. The humans are in compliance with the treaty. Their weapons, primitive as they may be, do music not fall under prohibited categories, and we certainly cannot ban them now without creating a massive music diplomatic incident. For what it is worth, Commander Chen offered, humans have been very excited about joining the coalition. We are eager to contribute to collective security efforts, and if any member species would like training in traditional archery or crossbow techniques, I'm sure we could arrange instructional programs, cultural, music exchange and all that. The look of absolute horror on every military representative's face suggested that cultural exchange was the last thing anyone wanted. And GT, music. And GT. I left the council chamber 3 hours later, my data pad full of incident reports, policy, music, recommendations, and urgent requests for revised combat training protocols. Somewhere in human space, 40 million civilians were practicing a hobby that could defeat our best soldiers, and we had music just welcome them with open arms. The galaxy, I realized, was about to become significantly more interesting, and I still had so much paperwork to file. 6 months after the compliance meeting that haunted my nightmares, I found myself aboard the coalition warship Indomitable Will, observing music, what military command was carefully calling a joint cooperative engagement. Everyone else called it exactly what it was, the first real test of human combat effectiveness against actual hostiles. The hostiles in question were the Krell Raider clans, persistent nuisance operating out of the frontier reaches. Music, they specialized in hit-and-run attacks on mining operations and cargo convoys, always staying one step ahead of coalition response. Music, fleets, their ships and soldiers boasted some of the most advanced shield technology money could buy, purchase from black market military contractors who asked no questions as long as the credits cleared. They were about to have a very bad day. I stood in the observation deck alongside Admiral Kethlon and a dozen other senior officers, watching the tactical music displays as our forces moved into position. 3 coalition frigates formed the primary assault wave, their crews trained and ready, and then trailing slightly behind in a modified cargo transport that the humans had cheerfully named the Pointy Music. End of the stick came the human auxiliary force, 150 humans, music, armed with bows, crossbows, and what Commander Chen had described as tactical medieval weaponry. They wore light armor, barely more than reinforced fabric, because heavier protection would slow them down. Their entire combat doctrine was built around speed, accuracy, and the absolute certainty that enemy shields would not stop them. This is insane, Torquemada muttered. Beside me, he had been assigned as military liaison to the human units, a position he accepted with all the enthusiasm of someone volunteering for airlock inspection duty. We are sending them into a fortified raider base with weapons that belong in a museum. You saw the cargo bay demonstration. reminded him that was a stationary target in controlled conditions. This is actual combat, the tactical display. Updated coalition music. Forces had engaged the outer defense perimeter. Energy weapons fire lit up. The void, plasma bolts and laser beams, splashing harmlessly against the Raiders' shields. The Raiders returned fire with equal futility, their shots absorbed by coalition shield matrices. It was a standard engagement, both sides firing until someone's shields failed or ammunition ran low. Then the human transport launched music, its boarding pods. These were not standard coalition boarding craft, those were heavily armored shielded battering rams, designed to punch through hull plating and deliver troops directly music into enemy corridors. The human pods were smaller, faster, and according to the specs I had reviewed, barely armored at all. They relied on speed and surprise rather than durability. 6 pods attached to the Raider station's hull. Within seconds, shaped charges, old-fashioned chemical explosives that the treaty did not regulate because who even used those anymore, blew open access hatches, and then the humans poured inside. The internal sensor feeds from the station were chaotic. Music. The Raiders had been expecting standard coalition tactics, energy weapons, and shield-to-shield combat in narrow corridors where numbers and positioning mattered. What they got was something no one in the galaxy had seen in centuries. Actual close-quarters combat. The first human through the breach carried a crossbow and what appeared to be a metal club. No, not a club, a mace. All flanges and brutal striking surfaces. A Raider soldier rounded the corner. Plasma rifle music, raised shields flickering at maximum strength. Human shot him through the throat. The arrow punched through his shield, through his armor. And GT music. And GT and dropped him before he could pull the trigger. The human advanced, stepping over the body without pausing. More Raiders appeared. Their shields were military-grade, top-of-the-line music, capable of shrugging off sustained fire from coalition standard weapons. The arrows did not care. Broadheads punched through energy barriers like they were not there. Crossbow music, bolts heavier and slower than arrows but carrying devastating kinetic energy, hit with enough force music to knock armored Raiders off their feet even when the armor held, and when the humans ran out of arrows. When music, the rain closed too tight for bows, they drew swords, actual swords, blades of folded steel and carbon composites, edges honed to molecular sharpness. One human, a large man with a braided beard, music, wielded a two-handed axe that looked like it had been pulled from a historical drama. He swung it in wide arcs that sent Raiders scrambling backward, their shields useless against a weapon that simply existed in physical space. They are in melee combat, Admiral Kethlon said, his voice filled with disbelief. They are fighting with swords and axes like barbarians. Music. Effective barbarians, I noted, watching another Raider fall to a human with a spear, an actual spear, just a pointed stick, fundamentally unchanged in design since their species learned to sharpen rocks. And GT music. And GT. The battle lasted 18 minutes. By the time coalition forces finished securing the outer sections, the humans had already taken the command center. Commander Chen stood amid a pile of unconscious Raiders, some shot with Arrows, others simply beaten down with. Music, shields, and blunt weapons. Wiping blood off a long knife that she apparently just carried as a backup. Weapon station secured, she reported. Calmly, music over the communication channel. Minimal casualties on our side, 3 injuries. And GT, music. And GT, none serious. Raiders are disarmed and ready for coalition custody. Observation deck was silent. We had just watched music, 150 humans armed with weapons that predated spaceflight dismantle a fortified raider position, defended by technology that had taken us centuries to develop. They had done music it faster and more efficiently than any coalition force could have managed. How many arrows did they bring? Someone asked weakly. Music. Lieutenant Kane, monitoring from the human transport, checked her inventory logs. Each archer carried approximately 40 arrows, music, or bolts. We have about 60% remaining, plenty for another engagement if needed. Another engagement. Music. They were ready to go again, right now, without even pausing to catch their breath. Over the next 3 months, reports flooded music in from across coalition space. Human auxiliary forces were being requested by every battle group, every peacekeeping operation, every anti-piracy patrol. Their effectiveness was undeniable. Pirates and raiders who had grown comfortable music behind their expensive shield suddenly found themselves very vulnerable to attacks. They had no defense against military academies. Began music, updating their curricula. Tactical manuals added new sections on defending against projectile music. Weapons, shield manufacturers started researching kinetic barriers, though early prototypes were energy intensive and interfered with existing system. The entire galactic defense industry was scrambling to adapt and clear's throat. The humans, they took it all in stride, offering training programs and music cultural workshops. Their instructors taught coalition soldiers how to recognize bow-armed opponents, how to use cover effectively against projectile weapons, basic concepts that every species had forgotten centuries ago. I attended one such workshop, partly out of morbid curiosity and partly because Security Division wanted someone to evaluate the program. Commander Chen herself led the session, demonstrating music, proper archery stance to a classroom of bewildered thracknery soldiers who struggled to hold the bows with their 3-fingered hands. The key, she explained patiently, is consistency. Every shot should feel identical. And GT, music. And GT, anchor point, draw length, release. Follow through. Archery is meditation with consequences. One of the students, a young soldier named Vexic, managed to hit the target after 6 tries. His classmates cheered. Chen smiled. Music. That smile, the one I had learned to associate with humans, revealing yet another uncomfortable truth about galactic civilization. After the class, as students filed out discussing draw weights and arrow trajectory, Chen approached me. Kelver, she said, using my music personal name with the casual familiarity humans seem to apply to everyone. I have been meaning to. Music asked, would you like to learn archery? We have beginner classes starting next cycle. It is quite relaxing once you get past the initial frustration. I looked music at her. This human who had accidentally revolutionized modern warfare by bringing a sporting hobby to a weapons compliance meeting. She genuinely seemed to think I might enjoy shooting arrows at targets for fun. Why, I asked, why do humans still practice music? These skills, you have energy weapons, you have technology. Why maintain music traditions from your primitive past? Chen considered the question absently, checking music, the string tension on a nearby practice bow, because they connect us to our history, because they teach patience and discipline, because sometimes the old ways music work better than the new ones. She paused. And because we never assume that just because something is ancient, it is obsolete. And GT, music, and GT, that I realized was the fundamental difference. Every other species in the galaxy had moved forward, leaving music behind, the tools and methods of their violent pasts. We had evolved, civilized ourselves, created treaties and regulations to ensure we never repeated our ancestors' mistakes. Humans had simply added to their arsenal. They had not abandoned their past, they had built upon it, keeping music every tool, every technique, every hard one lesson from thousands of years of conflict. They came to music, the stars, carrying both plasma rifles and longbows, quantum computers and sharpened steel. We had assumed that made them primitive. We were catastrophically wrong. I will consider your offer, I told Chen, knowing I would absolutely not be learning archery because I had enough stress in my life without adding voluntary target practice. She nodded, understanding. The offer stands. Music. And Kelver, thank you for being so reasonable during the compliance review. A lesser bureaucrat might have tried to block our membership over a technicality. And GT, music. And GT, I laughed, a bitter sound. I was just following regulations. The treaty was clear. Exactly, she said. You followed the letter music of the law, even when it led somewhere unexpected. That takes integrity. As she walked away, I reflected on those words. Integrity. Music. I had spent my entire career filing paperwork, checking boxes, ensuring compliance with regulations designed to keep the galaxy safe. Music. And in one afternoon, I had approved a loophole that rendered centuries of military doctrine obsolete. Music. The humans were right about one thing, though sometimes the old ways worked better than the new ones. Sometimes the simplest solution was music, a sharp piece of metal moving very fast, and sometimes the most dangerous warriors. Music were the ones everyone underestimated. I pulled out my data pad, opened a new file, and began typing my formal recommendation to the Security Council. The subject line read, proposed amendments to treaty music, definitions regarding non-chemical projectile systems. It was going to be a long report, but this time I was going to be thorough. This time I was going to account for every bent music stick, every sharpened blade, every ancient technique that humans had carried with them to the stars, because if there was one thing I had learned from this entire debacle, it was that assumptions could be far music more dangerous than any weapon, even ones made of wood and string.